I don't know who needs to hear this, but Rodwave is still extremely underrated. I mean, seriously, he and Taylor Swift are literally the only two artists of this past decade to have 3 consecutive #1 albums. And no, I didn't stutter. I mean that, and I'm dead ass. Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? Meanwhile, us Rodwave fans have been sitting back over the years enjoying his immense catalog of emotion-filled, therapy-driven, sad-filled music this entire time. Well, that is until now, and recently, where he said he no longer wants to be known as the sad artist.
I don't want to keep being a sad.
So like you're a prisoner to that.
And I'm sad about that. But in this video, I'm gonna break down why switching up now could be the single most riskiest decision that Rodwave has ever made in his career. No exaggeration. By the way, guys, my name is Uche, and I make videos like this every single week, or at least I'm planning to. So if you like what you see, hit that like button for me. If you want to see me get to 1K, I'm on the road to 1K. Hit that subscribe button. Now let's get into this. Okay. Let's talk about Rodarius Green, better known as Rod Wave, out of St. Petersburg, Florida, AKA, damn, I ain't got no AKAs on this one, guys. Hey, if you know what he's known for other than Rod Wave, y'all leave it in the comments. But anyway, it's hard not to acknowledge the immense talent of Rod Wave without talking about the fact that he is easily one of the most successful artists of his generation and really of this decade. His vulnerability is second to none. His storytelling is second to none. His ability to craft pain music is unmatched, to the point where I think bro is on the Mount Rushmore of pain music. I think he might have created a lane for this name that we now know as pain music, guys. You know, you got other artists like Polo G in this, even Lil Durk. There's tons of artists that I think this generation calls pain music, but I think Rod Wave probably does it the best. And at this point, I feel like he might be the rapper version of Kevin Durant. Like, he's a superstar that doesn't care for the shenanigans and the BS. Like, he literally makes his music and he goes home. Similar to what Kevin Durant does. Well, I guess minus the cussing people out part. Rod Wave don't really be cussing people on Twitter, but I digress. He also comes from that Kevin Gates, Kodak Black, NBA Youngboy tree of guys who also make pain music. And I think if you're somebody who also likes them artists, you're also gonna enjoy Rod Wave's music. They really blend with each other pretty well. But Rod Wave had a crazy start to music, man. This is a guy who really talked very openly about not really having this crazy aspirations of making music beyond high school, where his friends put him on and he just started making music, and his friends actually named him because he was so shy. He never really wanted to sing around people. And so that led him to obviously putting music out, creating his Hunger Games mixtape series, which we're gonna breeze through on this particular video. But if you guys are familiar, y'all leave y'all favorite songs from the Hunger Games trilogy in the comments below. I really want to talk about the PTSD EP, which had none other than Heart on Ice on this project, which is my personal introduction into Rod Wave's music. And so as we breeze past the EP, which he dropped, we talk about that Heart on Ice song, which was also on Ghetto Gospel back in 2019, which released November 1st, 2019. It debuted at number 10 on the Billboard charts, and at this point, it is certified platinum. It had popular songs like Cuban Links featuring Kevin Gates and Close Enough to Hurt. And by the way, side note, which Heart on Ice version is your favorite? Is it the one with Lil Durk, which is the remix, or the original? Because personally, I'm really a fan of that remix. I thought Durk slid on it. This was that hungry era of Durk where he was really making a name for himself in a major way. But next, we move on to Pray for Love, which released April 3rd, 2020. And it was his first major charting album, where it debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 charts. And at this point, it's certified platinum as well. It had popular songs like Rags to Riches, which had the remix featuring Lil Baby. It also had Fuck the World, and it had Thief in the Night. And so I think this was the album that dropped during COVID that I think, in my opinion, really cemented this guy as an up-and-coming superstar. Now, obviously, you guys probably are gonna say, what are you talking about? I thought he was a superstar before this, but I think the masses weren't really hip to Rod Wave until Heart on Ice, the remix, started popping, and then also Rags to Riches featuring Lil Baby really started to take off. But then we gotta talk about about the #1 era, and I'd argue the apex of the sad boy era of Rod Wave. Where I'm talking about, he had a streak of #1 albums that did match Taylor Swift, like I mentioned earlier. So Rod Wave dropped Soulfly on March 26, 2021, and this was his first #1 album, selling 130,000 album equivalent units in the first week. It had popular songs like Tombstone, Street Runner, and Richer featuring Polo G. Now guys, I ain't gonna hold you. That Tombstone video was a tearjerker. It was something that made me legit damn near shed a tear. I know y'all know what I'm talking about, man. When the little boy who was mute got shot by the police, bro, that was crazy. And I feel like only Rod Wave and maybe Polo G can paint a very vivid image with their lyricism mixed with the visuals. But to me, man, I think Street Runner and Tombstone, it really took Rod Wave to the next level, bro. I ain't gonna hold you. But then he dropped Beautiful Mind on August 12, 2022, which was his second #1 album, and it sold 115K first week units. It had popular songs like Cold December, which was the lead single off the album. It had Alone and Never Get Over Me. Again, Rod Wave continues to imprint himself as the sad guy, the guy who can get you in your feels, create music that tells a story. Every song that this guy usually comes with is like filled with angst and emotion. And for me, Alone did that for me on this album. And then he dropped Nostalgia on September 15, 2023, which is his third consecutive #1 album on the Billboard 200 charts, selling 137K first week equivalent units. It had popular songs like Fight the Feeling, Call Your Friends, and Great Gatsby. And by the way, as a side note, I thought Turks and Caicos featuring 21 Savage was a dope record as well. And so you guys let me know, what are your favorite songs from this project, but also out of his 3 #1 projects, which again are Nostalgia, Beautiful Mind, and Soulfly. What's your favorite #1 album from Rod Wave? Leave it in the comments for me below. But then we gotta move on to his most recent project called Last Lap, which dropped October 11, 2024. It peaked at #2 on the Billboard chart, selling 127K first week equivalent units. And to me, I ain't gonna lie, man, this was not a #1 album. It just missed the mark, obviously by 1 spot. But this is probably one of my favorite Rod Wave projects, man. I'm a fan of a lot of songs on this project, like 25. You got, of course, Last Lap, the title track. Passport Junkie is fire. Federal Nightmares. And I got sleepers on this project to me, like Nevermind, which is a beautiful record. And of course, Applying Pressure. I love those 2 songs. Those are actually some of my favorite records from him on this project. And so, unfortunately, this album came after the death of his right-hand man, aka his uncle. And so he talks a lot about that on this album. And I know that was a big loss for him because it actually not only was painted throughout this project, but his uncle was somebody who believed in him from day one. And
my uncle was like the discipline. He believed in the shit, made me believe. He like the only nigga in the world I would let if a deal or something come across and I said, hey, this is my number. So just with him gone, I just had to get out of rapper rockstar mode. I had to wake up.
So it was extremely painful hearing a lot of those records, but I know Rod Wave is somebody that was deeply impacted by the loss of his uncle. And man, you guys let me know what's your favorite song from this project. But let's talk about some of the singles he's dropped since Last Lap. For example, West Side Connection, January 2025, which I personally wasn't a huge fan of. I was more so a fan of him dropping the single Sinners. Obviously, it was his title track, The Sinners Movie, back in April of 2025. But of course, his most recent single called Leavin, which dropped October 2025, is none other than a continuation of Rod Wave giving you that pain and that aggression. And I ain't gonna hold you, bro. I'm here for it. I don't want him to ever stop. Okay, now that we got his discography out of the way, I think we gotta really analyze the artist versus the brand, and that is of Rod Wave. A lot of times, it's a gift and a curse to create a brand that is lasting and has a ton of fans tied to that one emotion. But what happens when the artist no longer believes in that brand? What happens when the artist wants to make a switch in that brand? And I think none other example paints that picture than what Rod Wave said recently on the Joe Budden Podcast, where he sat down. It was a Patreon episode. Dope episode, by the way. Joe Budden released it on YouTube. Y'all go check it out. I may even link it in the description. Really insightful. Rod Wave is clearly in his mogul bag, hence the title of that episode, Artist to Mogul. And like I mentioned before, man, he lost his uncle, and it seems like that really woke him up. It really woke him up to the business. It really woke him up to wanting to become more aware of how to really take his brand and business to the next level. And I'm all for it, bro. But on the Joe Budden podcast, you know, Joe Budden asked him a very ignorant question because he clearly doesn't know his catalog. And he asked him, he said, pardon my ignorance, but do you have any happy songs? And that really triggered Rod Wave to be like, damn. He said, see, that's the issue right there. He said he no longer wants to be known as the sad artist because he be walking in rooms and women be looking at him like kissing their teeth. You know how women do with the, like, oh, here come this sad dude again. And he said that really makes him feel bad.
I don't want to keep being the sad.
So like you're a prisoner to that. You're a prisoner to that title at that point.
But I feel like the concerts and the shows and shit, like, it's like I'm the like people who
you're a superhero
who fuck with this shit.
Yeah, true.
And I can't just because I'm feeling the way, but it's people who don't understand it, and I'm not finna break it down every time I bump into somebody. Like,
it was a double CD,
bro, I'm not sad every time you see me. I'm not.
So it puts Rod Wave in a really interesting place where he's had a ton of success from making emotion-driven music, making pain music, making his fans feel that hurt in the storytelling. It does damper the mood a bit when you in a party scene or you're in an upbeat situation or environment where people really don't want to hear that. And so I think it's a tough spot for Rod Wave, but hey, if you're a fan of Rod Wave like I am, you know that his entire discography is not filled with sad music. I think that's the misconception because while yes, his singles are typically sad and emotion-driven pain music, if you go listen to his album cuts, he talks about the same thing that all these other artists talk about, like guns and drugs and putting money on people's head and that gangster talk too. Rod Wave can talk that shit too. Let's be very clear. But I do think his superpower is diving deep into those topics that people don't want to talk about. And I think that's the beauty of Rod Wave's music, man. Like, he's somebody who has no shame to cover topics like a man's ego, or he has a song called Boys Don't Cry and saying how it's okay to feel hurt. And so while that is a gift and a curse, I think Rod Wave is somebody who does that at the highest level. So this is more of a conversation to me about Rod Wave's production versus the sad music that he makes, because let's be real, his production is extremely sentimental. It's a lot of pianos, it's a lot of guitars. It really sets a landscape and a soundscape that puts you in your emotions before he even says a word on the tracks. And so I'd be curious to know if he switches out from making sad music, what would the production sound like? Next, let's talk about the relatability dilemma that Rod Wave faces. I think he's done a great job at creating that intimate connection between his fan base over the years. And so what does it look like from a brand standpoint if Rod Wave switches up being the sad guy? Will his fans turn on him, or will his fans go with him in this journey? I think that's a very, very important question that I think even all fans are gonna have to answer, and Rod Wave gonna have to ask himself that question as well. Like, is it worth switching up now? Because it may not be worth it, guys. It may not be worth it. But I do want to cut Rod Wave a bit of slack. I say this all the time, and so does everybody else. Fans are fickle. But while fans are fickle, that doesn't give fans the right to dictate an artist's personal artistic journey. And so my whole thing is, if Rod Wave is at the point where he's struggling with creating a brand based around sadness that he no longer wants to be a part of full time, and that may alienate some of his fans, I think we gotta allow that artist the leeway to experiment. All right, let's talk about why it might be extremely risky to switch up now if Rod Wave is being dead ass about switching up from being sad, and why fans might actually turn on it. Like, let's have a conversation, guys. Now, you know we live in a therapy-driven era, and I'm sure Rod Wave has a quote-unquote therapy-based fan base who are people who are not afraid of confronting their emotions, and they rely heavily on music to express themselves as an outlet, or they rely on their favorite artists to speak to them and connect in that way. I feel like Rod Wave's fan base treats his music like a lifeline or a form of therapy in a sense. And so that transparency that he's created with his fan base, to me, is a unique bond that I haven't really seen a lot of artists tap into in the way Rodwave has done. And so I think switching up to a more fun, materialistic, or traditionally swag-filled, boasting about stuff that ain't really got nothing to do with nothing, which would kind of put him in the bulk of the majority of rappers, I don't really feel like that does him any justice. And I feel like it's going to alienate a lot of them type of fans. And secondly, we got to talk about how switching up and doing something different outside of what he has been doing could cost him a lot of credibility, because fans might look at him as inauthentic. Like, we got to be real on how much authenticity plays a part in music. When people perceive you as one way, that brand identity, how it connects to the music, is damn near what sells the music a lot of times, beyond the slap or beyond the fire song. And so, by the way, side note, that's actually one of the main reasons why I'm not a fan of AI music, and I don't think AI music is a good idea. If you're a mogul and you making money, okay, cool. But as a fan, if you know the artist you're listening to is not even a real artist, how do you truly connect in a way like you do with a real living, breathing human being you know goes through emotions like you? Again, that's just a side note, but I think about that a lot when it comes to authenticity in music and how important it actually really is, and people don't really talk about it enough. And so if you really think about some other examples of artists who switched up their brand in a way that worked for them, I think of artists like Chris Brown or Beyonce or Post Malone or Rihanna, who at one point decided to switch their genre. Shoot, I would even throw Lil Wayne into this when he had his rock album that the culture kind of liked, but not really. But Lil Wayne was so much of a rock star, it didn't even matter what he did because it just worked. And I fear that Rodwave doesn't fit in this particular conversation of artists who have decided to switch genres or switch topics, but still be able to sell the music because their personality is at the forefront. And so again, this is not an indictment on Rodwave, because again, I'm a fan of Rodwave. But if we're gonna have a real conversation, Rodwave's music and his superpower is in his storytelling. It's in his authenticity of how that sad, emotion, pain-driven music connects to how we perceive Rodwave as a person. And so can you imagine if Rodwave just out of the blue just said, I want to make rock music? Like, what would that sound like? Unless Rodwave got a different bag that I'm not familiar with, so be it, but I just can't see it. And so I think as we await his new album that he recently said is slated to drop at the top of this, 2026, I personally hope that he doesn't switch anything. I want him to keep being sad, keep making, I don't mean that in real life. Rodwave, please be happy. Like, get your life together like the rest of us. Please do what you need to do to like be happy. I root for him. I'm pretty sure you guys as fans do as well. But in terms of the music, please don't switch nothing up because it's not broken. So why are you trying to fix it? Am I crazy? Please let me know in the comments if I'm tripping. I might be, but I doubt it. I'm anticipating this new album that he got coming up, and I hope it remains sad. But what do you guys think? Do you want to see Rodwave switch things up, or should he just keep doing the same thing that he's been doing because it's been working? Y'all let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, my name is Uche. Yo, give me the 1K. Peace.